Well, I guess a good place to start here is from the beginning. And the beginning for me was January 14th, 1952, at the old Garrison General Hospital, Gastonia, North Carolina. I was born, and I remember that my mother held me up to the window of the hospital because my half-brother, William Eugene Whiteside, was not allowed to come up to the room to visit me because he was like, I think, 8 years old. So he got his first glimpse of me, his little brother, half-brother, from the street looking up at the room. And I'm told he went home, got on his bicycle, and pedaled all around the neighborhood shouting, "I've got a baby brother, I've got a baby brother." He was so excited about that. And he and I were not close because he was raised pretty much at the home of our grandparents, Reverend W. Arthur Hoffman Sr. and his wife Bertha Hoffman. And I was raised, at first I lived in the basement apartment of 2108 Morton Avenue, my grandparents' home. Early memory, I definitely remember as an infant throwing a glass baby bottle with a nipple out of my crib into the floor and shattering it. I have a memory of pedaling my tricycle up to the television set, an old black and white set, and Speedy Alka-Seltzer was on, and I shouted, "Pediaki Taki." I have a memory of crying in the woods behind my grandparents' house. I seem to have a memory of my grandmother wringing a chicken's neck and the chicken running around like a chicken with its head cut off. There was an old chicken house that I used to play in and on top of. But it was a non-eventful childhood. A little later we moved to 510 East 12th Avenue, Gastonia, where I still live today. And I can remember my favorite Thanksgiving, 1962. I've never duplicated it. It's so good. I was at the home of my grandparents, Reverend Arthur Hoffman and his wife. And I remember watching Amos and Andy rerun on TV, and it was pouring rain that day. And I remember being very frustrated and mad because I wanted to play Tarzan in the woods, but couldn't because of the rain. So I told my grandfather, I said, I don't have anything to be thankful for. And he was a Baptist minister, very devout, very much into his faith. "Oh, yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do." And it turned out to have been the best Thanksgiving of my entire life. I remember having a good Thanksgiving dinner, and I remember at noon the TV stations from Charlotte would play movies, like your midday movie and things like that. And they showed Road to Morocco, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, Dorothy Lamour. And I vividly remember watching that and eating the Thanksgiving dinner and feeling so warm and so secure and so loved. And I've never really been able to equal that Thanksgiving day. It was pretty much a solitary childhood. I remember one of my early heroes was Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan. And I would play in the woods and swing on ropes from trees And one weekend I managed to crawl around in my jungle as Tarzan. And I got poison oak. And it got all over me. It got in my eyes swelled shut. October 1962, I had to be out of school that day because of poison ivy. But I remember at my grandparents' house, sitting in a chair in front of that black and white TV, and Tarzan and his mate came on. And I was just completely enthralled. And even though I couldn't go into the woods and play Tarzan because of the poison oak, I was able to sit there and watch it and be Tarzan vicariously, I guess you could say, through Johnny Weissmuller. And that's a very, very special memory. I remember standing in front of the mirror with a broom and putting Ricky Nelson records on and Elvis Presley soundtrack from Loving You motion picture, and lip syncing in front of the mirror. I just want to be your teddy bear. And all the great Elvis songs, Lonesome Cowboy, Got a Lot of Living to Do, Mean Woman Blues, Loving You. Very special. And Elvis was also a hero. I thought he was one of the greatest actors who ever stepped in front of a movie camera. And I emulated him. I also loved Ricky Nelson, watched him every week on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. And every time he had a record come out, I would take my allowance money and buy it. So it was a very special little childhood there for me. It was pretty much spent solitary, but I did have some playmates, Randy Oots, Butch Inslee, Chuck Warmby, Mike Hudson. We would play together. We would play football and basketball and ride bicycles. I will share a memory of almost losing my life on Highway 74 West. I had an aunt and uncle, Doit and Rita Hoffman, who lived on the Kings Mountain Highway. And I had my bicycle, and my friend Mickey Hudson borrowed a bicycle. I think Chuck Warmby was with us. I must have been about 9 years old, and we were pedaling our bicycles. We were going to visit my Aunt Rita. And I remember trying to merge up onto the road, 74, Highway 74. And the handlebars flew out from me. And I fell and slid out into the road and was barely missed by a Red Ryder 18-wheeler transfer truck that went by. It almost hit me, and Mickey Hudson ran up the back of my bicycle and hit me right here with his pedal. So that was a very close call. And as I remember, we didn't even ride our bicycles back to my grandparents' house. We pushed the bicycles walking. So that was a very close call and could have very easily ended my life at age 9. But of course it wasn't time for me to go. But I went to Armstrong Elementary School. I had some wonderful school teachers there, and I was not a really good student. I could have been a lot better than I was if I had taken the time to study and apply myself to the schoolwork. But I was pretty much the class clown, cutting up, doing stupid, foolish things, frequently getting paddlings with an old ping pong paddle in the cloakroom. That's where you put your cloak. And I had my share of discipline. My favorite teacher was Horace Beam. He taught the 6th grade at Armstrong, and he taught us German. So I learned a little bit of German from him, and he was just a magnificent teacher, and I was very fortunate to have been able to know him in his final years of life. In fact, I took him a few years before he died to Walmart to buy his groceries, and boy, he loaded up. I didn't think they would all fit into my little Hyundai, but somehow we got them in there. But Horace Bean was my favorite teacher, and he would administer arm paddlings. And I remember his face would turn red as a beet, and he would say, "Roll up that sleeve, roll up that sleeve." And you'd have to roll your sleeve up, and it was, and I can still see his face. And once you got one of those arm paddlings, you didn't commit the crime again. But it was a fun elementary school year. In 1964, I went to Ray Junior High School, which is today Yorkchester Middle School. Got into my share of trouble there, was a bit of a cut up. I want to mention something that I didn't earlier, a couple of things. I remember a good friend of mine, some of the kids would try to pick on me, but I was defended by a young man named Charles Perkins. I remember Charles had very, very poor vision, and to look at his paper, he would have to put his eyes just almost touching the paper. But he was a defender of me, and I never forgot that. I thought that was very, very courageous of him, and all the kids left me alone after he stepped in. And I remember being told that at age 2, I don't have a memory of this, but I was standing up on the car seat. My father was driving. I was in the middle standing up. No law that required car seats for children then, and my mother over here. And there was a commercial on the radio. I must have heard it before, but it must have been for an antacid, because my mother said that just as clear as day. I said, they cost a little more, but then they do so much more. So I think that was a bit of being a prodigy, or a little bit of a glimpse, a preview of coming attractions in my life, that there was eventually going to be a career in radio or television, broadcasting of some kind. But back to Ray Junior High, I listened to the radio religiously, and I became enthralled with a radio disc jockey on WAYS, Big Waves Radio. His name, Jack Gale. Jack's still alive in Florida, doing his thing. But he was the funniest. He made me laugh every morning with characters like one who would do the weather. His name was Lowell Pressure. He had Lope the folk singer. He had Mother. He just had so many characters, and he could incorporate these. And I had somebody tell me later that when I became a radio announcer, Jerry McSwain told me, he said, you can do something as a radio announcer that I couldn't do. You can be reading a live commercial, take a record, cue it up, get it ready to play, flip through a copybook in front of you, talking on the radio, and get a commercial cart and put it in and play it. It was sort of like, like an octopus with two arms. And he said, I've only seen one other person do that, and that was Jack Gale. And I thought that was the greatest compliment that I could have ever been paid, but to say that I was able to do something rare that Jack Gale could do. But it was my joy to be able to make people laugh, talk about some of my personal experiences on the radio, do interviews, Willie Nelson 5 times, Hank Williams Jr. twice, just so many great celebrities that I was blessed to have been able to interview with my radio career. I went out for football in the 8th grade. I never was any good. I also ran track. But I went out for sports not because I had an enjoyment of sports, but rather to try to get girls. Didn't work. Nothing worked. I could have been as rich as Donald Trump. I could have driven a Corvette Stingray, brand new. It wouldn't have worked. I just never was blessed with an ability. With all due respect to John F. Kennedy, I was just never blessed with the ability to attract the fair sex. But that was okay because I had a rewarding life. It was fun. It was enjoyable.